My name is Chloe, and at 29 years old, I thought I had a PhD in betrayal. Growing up as the dutiful daughter who juggled two jobs to get through college while my younger brother Leo had his path paved with gold, I'd learned a thing or two about injustice. But nothing could have braced me for the night I heard my own father tell my brother, "Don't worry, we'll make your sister pay for everything." Their scheme didn't just break my heart, it incinerated the world I thought I knew. What they didn't count on, however, was that I wouldn't let them touch a single cent of what I had bled for. Before I unpack this devastating story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been let down by the very people who were supposed to be your safe harbor, hit that like button and subscribe. I was raised in a quiet, middle-class suburb in Ohio. My father was an accountant for a regional firm, and my mother worked in retail at a local mall. From the outside, we were the picture of the American dream: a tidy two-story house, a manicured lawn, and annual summer road trips to the coast. But behind our front door, a very different narrative was being written. As the firstborn, I was subjected to impossibly high standards from day one. My parents demanded straight A's, flawless conduct, and a level of maturity far beyond my years. If I came home with an A-, my father would pointedly ask what happened to the plus. When I secured second place at the fourth grade science fair, my mother mused aloud about why I hadn't pushed just a little harder for first. Then came Leo, my brother, 5 years my junior. The moment he was brought home from the hospital, it was glaringly obvious that his life would be governed by a different set of rules. While my bedroom was furnished with plain, functional pieces, Leo's room was a fantasy land, complete with a custom-built race car bed and walls adorned with expensive, themed decals. When birthdays and holidays rolled around, I'd unwrap practical gifts like clothing or books, while Leo was showered with the latest video game consoles, toys, and gadgets. "Your brother is still so young," my mother would say, with a dismissive wave of her hand whenever I dared to question the imbalance. "Boys just need more encouragement," my father would chime in, as if my gender automatically endowed me with a resilience to neglect. By the time I was 10, I was in charge of doing the dishes, helping with laundry, and maintaining my room in a state of pristine order. Leo, in stark contrast, would leave a wake of destruction, toy parts and snack wrappers, wherever he went, with zero repercussions. "Just clean up after him, honey," my mother would sigh if I complained. "He's just being a boy." When I turned 12, unpaid babysitting was added to my long list of chores. I became their default caretaker whenever they had a dinner date or social engagement. "You're so mature for your age," they'd praise, framing it as a compliment instead of the burden they had imposed on me. The Christmas when I was 14 is seared into my memory. For months, I had been pleading for a laptop for my schoolwork, even researching affordable models to present my case. On Christmas morning, I was given a clunky secondhand machine that struggled to even open a web browser. A couple of hours later, I watched as Leo tore the wrapping off a brand new, top-of-the-line gaming computer that cost at least 3 times as much as the modest laptop I had requested. "Your brother needs it for his games," my father explained, noticing the look on my face. "And you know, those games are great for his hand-eye coordination and problem-solving skills. What about my schoolwork? What about my future?" The questions died on my lips because I already knew their answer. At 16, I got my first job at a local diner, working weekends and holidays. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. I needed my own money to afford the things my parents freely gave my brother, while he received a generous allowance for merely breathing. "It builds character," my father would say about my job, patting my shoulder as if forcing me into premature adulthood was some grand favor. High school only amplified the disparities. When I needed money for a class trip to Washington, D.C., my parents told me to dip into my savings. A few months later, they enthusiastically paid for Leo to attend a 2-week coding camp that cost double. "Your brother needs these kinds of opportunities for his future," my mother stated, as if my own future wasn't a worthy investment. This pattern was the backdrop for every birthday, every holiday, every significant moment. Leo's minor efforts were met with grand celebrations and expensive rewards. My significant achievements were met with brief nods and the weight of ever-increasing expectations. The most painful part wasn't the material inequality, though that was vast. It was the chasm in emotional investment. My parents poured their time, energy, and pride into Leo, leaving me to navigate my own path. They attended every single one of his soccer games, their cheers echoing across the field. Yet they missed my induction into the National Honor Society because something came up at work. They had his mediocre art projects professionally framed, while my academic medals and certificates gathered dust in a desk drawer. Throughout it all, I watched Leo morph from a coddled child into an entitled young man. He expected the world to cater to him, threw tantrums when he didn't get his way, and developed a chilling lack of empathy. By the time he was 18, he was barely capable of doing his own laundry or making a simple sandwich. My parents just laughed it off as Leo being Leo, continuing to enable him. I, meanwhile, retreated inward, building fortifications around my heart and channeling all my energy into the one thing I could control: my future. I outstudied everyone, joined every club that would look good on a college application, and worked every possible shift at the diner, hoarding every dollar I earned. "Why are you always so serious, Chloe?" my mother would ask when I'd skip family movie night to study. "You'll miss these years when they're gone," my father would add, when I chose a work shift over a family barbecue. They never grasped that I had already missed out on the family they so freely gave to Leo. I wasn't their child in the same way. I was their utility, their built-in help, their fallback plan, never their priority. By the time I graduated high school as valedictorian, I had come to terms with the fact that my success would always be seen as merely expected, never exceptional. As I stood at the podium delivering my speech on perseverance, I scanned the audience and saw my family. My parents were there, yes, but I saw them nudging Leo, telling him to pay attention, rather than looking at me with the pride I had so desperately craved. That night, amidst the congratulations from neighbors and relatives, I made a silent vow to myself. I would build a life so successful, so undeniably my own, that even my parents would have to acknowledge my worth. Not because I still needed their approval, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was more than the afterthought they had made me feel like for 18 long years. Little did I know that very determination would lead me straight to the most profound betrayal of my life, and ultimately, to my liberation. The summer after graduation was a whirlwind of long hours at the diner and endless paperwork for college. I had been accepted into a reputable state university with a partial academic scholarship that covered roughly 40% of the tuition. It was an accomplishment I was proud of, but it left a daunting financial chasm I needed to bridge on my own. "We need to discuss college finances," my father announced one evening in July, summoning me to his home office. My mother sat beside him, her face a mask of careful neutrality. I had been steeling myself for this conversation. For years, my parents had made vague promises about contributing to my education. But as I sat across from them, watching them exchange a loaded glance, I felt a familiar dread. "We've gone over our finances," my father began, needlessly shuffling papers on his desk. "And we've concluded that we are unable to contribute to your college expenses at this time." The words landed like a punch to the gut, even though I had anticipated them. What followed was the twist of the knife. "We have to start saving for Leo's education," my mother added softly. "You know how expensive those top-tier computer science programs are." Leo was still 3 years away from even applying to college, yet his hypothetical future was already taking precedence over my present reality. "I understand," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. Arguing was futile. Crying would only give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. So I shifted into business mode, asking about financial aid forms and student loan applications, taking notes as if this were a professional meeting rather than another chapter in my book of parental neglect. That night, I overhauled my budget spreadsheet and applied for every scholarship I could find. I also submitted applications for 3 more part-time jobs near campus, calculating that I'd need to work at least 20 hours a week just to cover books, housing, and the tuition gap. By September, I had landed 2 positions, one at the university library for 15 hours a week, and another at a local coffee shop for weekend shifts. Between my classes, my jobs, and my studying, I was running on about 5 hours of sleep a night. My cramped dorm room became my haven, the first space that was truly mine. I furnished it with thrift store finds and focused on creating a calm sanctuary for the rare moments I was actually there. My roommate Alyssa quickly became a close friend and often voiced her concern over my brutal schedule. "You can't sustain this pace for 4 years, Chloe," she warned one night, finding me hunched over a textbook at 3 a.m. after I'd just finished a closing shift. "Watch me," I replied, my eyes never leaving the page. The exhaustion was a physical entity. Some mornings, it was a Herculean effort just to get out of bed. Some nights, I'd wake up with the imprint of my laptop keyboard on my cheek. I caught every flu and cold that made its way through the dorms, my immune system battered by stress and sleep deprivation. But I never missed a single class. I never submitted an assignment late. I never failed an exam. And most importantly, I never asked my parents for a dime. They would call occasionally, our conversations brief and centered on Leo's latest triumphs. He'd made the varsity soccer team. He was selected for a special computer science elective. He needed a new laptop. "We just got him the newest MacBook Pro," my mother shared proudly during one call. "It cost a fortune, but your father says it's an investment in his future." I thought of my own ancient laptop, held together by duct tape and sheer will, and said nothing. During my sophomore year, I declared my major in finance, discovering a genuine love for the subject that went beyond its career potential. Numbers were logical. Financial models were impartial. There was a clear-eyed fairness in the world of finance that was absent from my family life. I thrived, earning the respect of my professors, who began mentoring me and recommending me for internships. The summer after my junior year, I landed a highly competitive internship at a major financial firm in Chicago. The position paid well enough for me to rent a tiny sublet and even put a small amount into savings, my first real taste of the financial freedom I so desperately wanted. That internship was a game changer. My performance impressed senior management so much that they offered me a full-time analyst position upon graduation, with a starting salary that felt like a lottery win to someone who had spent years counting every penny. When I called my parents with the news, their reaction was predictably lukewarm. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother said before quickly changing the subject. "Oh, before I forget, Leo got into that summer program at Northwestern. We're just so proud of him." By the time I graduated summa cum laude, I had worked thousands of hours at multiple jobs, taken out the bare minimum in student loans, and secured a career that would allow me to pay them off in 2 years if I lived frugally. At 22, I moved to Chicago and threw myself into my work. My tiny studio apartment felt like a palace compared to the dorms and sublets I'd known. For the first time, I could buy groceries without agonizing over every price tag and occasionally afford small luxuries like a latte or a new hardcover book. I opened multiple savings accounts, each with a specific purpose: an emergency fund, student loan repayment, a down payment for a future home. Every paycheck was meticulously allocated, with the majority funneled into savings. The frugal habits forged in college were hard to break, even as my income grew. My dedication at the firm paid off. I took on the most challenging projects, worked longer hours than anyone else, and consistently blew past my performance targets. My first promotion came within 18 months, another a year after that. Each rung I climbed on the corporate ladder brought more responsibility, but also a bigger salary and better benefits. By 26, I had paid off my student loans in full, built a 6-month emergency fund, and started investing aggressively for my retirement. At 27, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small but perfectly located 1-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park. The day I signed the mortgage papers was one of the proudest of my life. I had a home. A real home, purchased with money I had earned through grit and sacrifice. Throughout these years, my relationship with my family remained polite but distant. I sent cards and gifts for birthdays and holidays, and made the trip back to Ohio once or twice a year for brief, stilted visits where the conversation inevitably centered on Leo. He had eventually gone to college, the same state university I attended, but with my parents footing the entire bill. From what I could gather, he'd changed his major 3 times, taken 5 years to graduate with a generic business degree, and then moved straight back home to figure things out. At 29, I had built the secure, independent life I had promised myself as a teenager. I had a successful career, a home I owned, and a tight-knit circle of friends who had become my chosen family. I had proven to myself that I could not only survive, but thrive without the support that had been so lavished on my brother. And then came the fateful weekend visit that would tear down the last remaining facade of our family. It was my mother's 55th birthday that called me back to Ohio that April. Despite our strained relationship, I had always made a point to acknowledge her birthday. This year, I decided to make the trip in person, driven partly by a sense of duty and partly because it had been nearly a year since my last visit. I arrived on a Friday evening, bearing an expensive handbag my mother had been subtly hinting at for months, elegantly wrapped with a card that expressed more warmth than I genuinely felt. My father gave me his standard perfunctory side hug before his eyes drifted back to the basketball game on TV. "Chloe, you made it," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she accepted the gift. "Leo's been here since Thursday." Of course he had. Leo, now 24, was still living at home, seemingly content with his lack of employment. His designer clothes and new smartwatch, however, suggested he wasn't exactly roughing it. "The corporate titan returns," he smirked by way of greeting. "How's life in the big city?" "Busy but good," I replied, my tone neutral. I had learned long ago that sharing any specifics of my success only led to awkward silences or abrupt changes of topic. Dinner was a familiar performance, with the spotlight fixed firmly on Leo's life, or lack thereof. He had apparently applied for a few jobs at tech startups, but was being selective. He had joined a recreational soccer league. He was thinking about a coding boot camp that would really launch his career. The program costs $15,000, my mother mentioned casually. But your father and I feel it's a solid investment. I nodded, taking a bite of lasagna, and thought about how they had refused to contribute a fraction of that amount to my actual college degree. After dinner, Leo left to meet friends at a bar, and I helped my mother clear the kitchen. We engaged in superficial small talk about her garden club and the neighbor's new deck. It was the conversation of polite strangers, not a mother and daughter. We'll have a proper celebration tomorrow, she said, wiping down the counter. I made reservations at Giovanni's for 6. Giovanni's was the most expensive restaurant in our town, the kind of place reserved for major milestones. I nodded, already knowing I would be expected to cover a significant portion of the bill. By 10:30, the house was dark. My parents had gone to bed, and I was in my old childhood room, now a sterile guest room stripped of any personality. Leo was still out. Sleep wouldn't come, so I decided to go downstairs for a glass of water. As I crept down the staircase, being careful to avoid the third step that always creaked, I heard the front door open and close, followed by hushed voices. It was Leo, and my father had apparently gotten up to meet him. I froze in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. I was about to retreat upstairs when I heard my name. "Chloe doesn't need to know," my father was saying, his voice a low, urgent whisper in the stillness of the house. "This stays between us. I should have left then." Some instinct screamed at me that I was on the verge of hearing something that would change everything irrevocably, but I was rooted to the spot, a prisoner of my own curiosity. "How bad is it?" my father asked. Leo let out a heavy sigh. "About 50,000 now. The online poker sites, the credit cards. It all piled up faster than I thought." My breath hitched. $50,000 in debt? How is that even possible while living rent-free? "Christ, Leo," my father hissed. "Your mother can't find out the full amount. She thinks it's half that." I know, Leo replied, his voice taking on a whiny, pleading tone I remembered from his childhood. "I messed up, Dad. Big time. But I've learned my lesson, I swear." There was a long, tense silence before my father spoke again, his voice chillingly calm. "Listen, don't worry. We'll make your sister pay for everything." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I flattened myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Chloe?" Leo asked, his tone confused but not resistant. "How? She's got that high-powered job in Chicago, that condo." "She's loaded," my father continued, the logic sickeningly simple in his mind. "And frankly, she owes this family, after everything we've done for her. Everything they'd done for me." The audacity was breathtaking. "We'll pitch it as a family business," my father explained, his voice gaining confidence as he laid out his trap. "Some kind of real estate investment opportunity, something that sounds legitimate, something she'll want to be a part of. You think she'll just hand over 50 grand? Leo sounded skeptical. "Not hand over." "Invest," my father corrected him. "We'll get her to take out a business loan. With her credit score and income, she'll get approved in a heartbeat. We promise her a partnership, big returns, whatever it takes." I felt a wave of nausea. They were plotting to defraud me, to saddle me with a mountain of debt, to bail out my reckless brother. What if she wants to see a business plan or talk to her financial friends? Leo asked, a sliver of doubt in his voice. My father let out a dry chuckle. "You know your sister. She's always been desperate for our approval. We'll sell it as her big chance to finally do something important for the family. That emotional hook will cloud her judgment." Just then, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and my mother's voice joined them. "What are you two whispering about down here?" "Just going over the plan for Chloe," my father said. "Oh," my mother replied, her voice dropping. "Did Leo tell you about the other credit card?" Yes, my father sighed. 50,000 total. My mother's sigh was heavy with resignation, not shock. Well, Chloe has an obligation to help her brother. Family helps family. She's done very well for herself. It's time she contributed back. Exactly, Leo chimed in, his voice suddenly animated. She's always so proud of her job and her stupid condo. She can afford it. She'll be here all weekend, my father concluded. I'll plant the seed about the investment idea tomorrow after her birthday dinner. We'll work on her over the next few months, get her to sign the loan documents by summer. She'll jump at the chance, Leo added, a sneer in his voice that made my skin crawl. She's always so desperate to feel included. I had heard more than enough. Moving with a silence born of shock, I backed away, crept up the stairs, and slipped back into the guest room, closing the door without a sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body trembling as the full, horrifying weight of their betrayal crashed down on me. My own family was conspiring to ruin me financially, to rescue the son they had already ruined with their indulgence. They discussed it with such ease, such entitlement, as if my hard-earned success was a resource they had a right to plunder. I thought of the thousands of hours I'd worked, the nights I'd spent hunched over textbooks, the countless sacrifices I'd made to build a life of security, and they were going to try and burn it all down with a single, manipulative lie. In that dark, sterile room, the last flicker of hope I held for my family died, and I knew, with a terrifying clarity, exactly what I had to do. I didn't sleep a wink that night. How could I, with the raw knowledge of their plot churning in my gut? Instead, I sat on the guest room bed, my laptop glowing in the dark, and began to systematically dismantle the life that included them. A strange, cold calm settled over me, a state of hyper-focus that only emerges in true crisis. The pain was there, a deep, throbbing ache beneath the surface, but I walled it off to concentrate on self-preservation. First, I did a full audit of my finances. My savings were significant, but spread across several accounts. My investment portfolio was healthy, but liquidating it would come with penalties. My condo had equity, but tapping into it would mean refinancing. I needed to lock down every single asset. Next, I confronted the emotional reality. What I was about to do wasn't creating distance. It was an amputation, a complete and total severing of family ties. Was I ready for that? I thought about my childhood, the relentless favoritism, the dismissal of my achievements, the unspoken rule that I would fend for myself while Leo was handed the world. I thought about college, working myself to the point of collapse while they happily funded Leo's extended stay. And now, this, the ultimate betrayal. A plan to use my love for them, my desire for connection, as a weapon against me. Yes, I was ready. In all the ways that truly mattered, I had been on my own for my entire life. Quietly, I gathered the few things I had brought for the weekend, repacking my suitcase with surgical precision. I left my mother's expensive birthday gift on the dresser. I wouldn't stoop to their level by rescinding a gift. On a notepad from my travel bag, I scribbled a short, vague note. Work emergency. Had to fly back to Chicago immediately. Happy birthday, Mom. No apologies, no explanations. They would assume I'd left in the early morning, buying me precious hours. Then I began my vigil, waiting for the house to fall into the deepest part of its slumber. At 2:30 a.m., I heard Leo finally stumble in, his heavy footsteps passing my door before his own closed with a definitive click. By 3 a.m., the only sound was my father's distant snoring. I picked up my suitcase and slid my feet into my shoes. I eased the guest room door open and navigated the dark hallway from memory, my feet instinctively avoiding the creaky third stair. I paused at the front door, glancing back into the shadows of the house that had never really felt like a home. This was it. The last time I would ever stand here. The thought brought not a pang of sadness, but a profound, exhilarating sense of liberation. I slipped out, closing the door gently behind me. My rental car was in the driveway, a decision I was now immensely grateful for. The night air was cool and crisp as I drove away from my childhood home for the last time, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I never once looked in the rearview mirror. I checked into a generic airport hotel 20 minutes away. The night clerk barely registered my existence as he handed me a key card. By 4A, Millie. I was in a clean, anonymous room, ready to execute the next phase of my plan. I logged into my primary bank account and transferred the bulk of my savings to a secondary account at a different institution, one my parents knew nothing about. I left just enough in the first account to avoid closure fees. Next, I called the 24/7 customer service lines for my credit cards. I reported potential fraudulent activity on my accounts and requested enhanced security measures. For my main card, I claimed I'd lost my wallet, triggering a freeze and ensuring a new card would be mailed to my Chicago address, rendering the old one useless. I sent an urgent email to my financial advisor, requesting a call first thing in the morning to review my entire portfolio and add new layers of security. I then emailed my boss, explaining I needed to take Monday and Tuesday as emergency personal days. Finally, I searched for a New York attorney specializing in financial fraud and identity theft, sending a detailed inquiry to a highly rated firm. As the first weak light of dawn filtered through the hotel curtains, I felt a bone-deep exhaustion, but my mind was still racing. I ordered room service and sat by the window, watching the sunrise over a new, uncertain horizon. My phone started vibrating around 9 a.m. A text from my mother, then another, then a missed call, then one from my father. I silenced the notifications without reading a single word. Around 11 a.m., I checked out and drove to the airport, changing my flight to the earliest possible departure, the change fee a small price to pay for my freedom. Waiting at the gate, I finally allowed the emotional dam to break. The hurt was a physical ache in my chest, a confirmation of a truth I had always known but never wanted to face. My family didn't see me as a daughter to be loved and cherished, but as a resource to be tapped. Boarding the flight to Chicago, I felt a strange cocktail of grief and steely resolve. By the time we landed, I had made a fragile peace with my decision. I would protect myself because it was painfully clear no one else ever would. That evening, as I unlocked the door to my condo, I was overcome with a profound sense of sanctuary. This space, every inch of it paid for by my own labor, was a tangible symbol of everything I had built in spite of them. I dropped my suitcase and walked through the quiet rooms, touching the furniture, the books, the life that was truly mine. I opened every window, letting the cool city air sweep through, a symbolic cleansing of my family's toxic influence. The days ahead would be filled with practicalities, meetings with lawyers and advisors, new security protocols. But tonight, in the safety of my own home, I finally let myself feel it all. I cried for the little girl who was never good enough, for the teenager who worked herself into the ground trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional, and for the woman whose success was seen only as an opportunity for exploitation. And then, as the tears subsided, I felt something else. Relief. The exhausting, lifelong effort of seeking approval from people incapable of giving it was over. The truth, however ugly, had set me free. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in years, my subconscious understanding, long before my waking mind, that I had finally escaped a debt that was never mine to pay. Sunday morning dawned with a barrage of 27 missed calls and 43 text messages. I scrolled through the notifications, my thumb hovering over them for a moment before I deleted the entire thread, unread. I needed a clear head, and their inevitable guilt-tripping and gaslighting would only muddy the waters. My father had also sent 3 emails, their subject lines escalating in urgency. Where are you? Zrania, family emergency, discussion needed, and finally, call home immediately. I deleted those too. By noon, I was on a video call with my financial advisor. She was horrified by my story and immediately implemented a raft of new security measures on my accounts. We established verbal passwords, removed my parents as emergency contacts, and put a freeze on my credit to prevent any unauthorized loans from being taken out in my name. This is disturbingly common, she told me, her voice grim. Family financial exploitation is a huge problem. You did the right thing by acting fast. The attorney I'd found responded and scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. She was a specialist in family financial abuse. For 90 minutes, she laid out a clear strategy to protect my assets and establish firm legal boundaries. Document everything, she advised. Save every text, every voicemail, every email where they mention their plan. She guided me through filing proactive reports with credit bureaus, creating a paper trail that would make it nearly impossible for them to use my identity. By Sunday evening, I felt like I was living in a fortress of my own making. The emotional confrontation, however, was still looming. On Monday, I took the personal day and continued my financial lockdown, moving investment accounts, changing every password I had, and updating my will to remove my family as beneficiaries, designating charities instead. Late that afternoon, a text from Leo came through. Mom is a wreck. What the hell is wrong with you? I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping my lips, and deleted it without responding. By Monday night, they had deployed the extended family. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister, left a rambling voicemail about how disappointed she was in my selfish behavior. My cousin Mark sent a text asking if I was okay. I sent a brief reply to him, saying I was fine but dealing with a private matter. Tuesday, I went back to work, losing myself in complex financial models that offered the comfort of logic and reason. That evening, I knew I had to face them. I couldn't live in hiding forever. I needed to draw a line in the sand to truly move on. I sent a single text to my parents. I will call at 8 p.m. Please have Leo there. At exactly 8 o'clock, I initiated a video call from my home office, my professional space, a shield of armor. My parents' faces popped up, tight with a mixture of anger and confusion. Leo joined a second later, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Chloe, what on earth is going on?" my mother began, her voice sharp. "You left without a word on my birthday weekend. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Of course." Her first thought was social embarrassment, not my safety. "I had an emergency," I stated, my voice calm and even. "You could have called," my father interjected. "We've been worried sick." I looked directly into the camera. "I overheard your conversation with Leo on Friday night." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went pale. Leo looked away. Only my mother seemed genuinely bewildered. "What conversation?" she asked. "The one about Leo's $50,000 gambling debt," I said, letting each word land. "The one where you laid out your plan to trick me into taking out a loan to pay for it. The one where you discussed how to manipulate my desire for a family connection to get me to sign the papers." My mother's confusion morphed into horror as she shot a look at my father. It seemed she hadn't been privy to the full, premeditated nature of their scheme. We were just exploring options, my father stammered, his tone defensive. Nothing was decided. You said, and I quote, "Don't worry, we'll make your sister pay for everything." I countered, my voice like ice. You talked about me like I was a walking, talking bank account, not your daughter. You were eavesdropping, Leo finally piped up. Real mature Chloe. How interesting, I replied coldly. Your concern isn't that you were plotting to defraud me, but that I found out about it. No one was going to defraud you, my father insisted. It was a business opportunity for the whole family. Stop lying, I snapped. I heard it all. The gambling, the credit cards, the loan in my name. I heard you strategize about how to use my emotions against me. My mother started to cry, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or just another tool of manipulation. Families are supposed to help each other, she sobbed. Leo made mistakes, but he's your brother. When has this family ever helped me? I asked, the question hanging in the air. When I needed help with college, you told me to figure it out myself. When I needed emotional support, you were too busy applauding Leo's mediocrity. When I finally built my own success, you saw it as a bank to be robbed. My father's expression hardened into a familiar scowl. You have always been selfish, Chloe, only ever thinking about yourself. I let out a humorless laugh. That's rich. Let me make myself perfectly clear. I will never give Leo a single dollar. I will never co-sign a loan, invest in a phantom business, or entangle my finances with any of you ever again. You ungrateful little, my father began, but I cut him off. I have secured my accounts. I have spoken with lawyers. I have documented this entire conversation. If you so much as attempt to use my name or my identity, I will press charges. Leo scoffed. You're being so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm protecting myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. What will people think? My mother wailed. What will we tell everyone? Tell them whatever you want, I said. But if you spread lies about me, I will counter with the truth. All of it. The decades of favoritism, the financial neglect, and this pathetic attempt to make me pay for Leo's gambling addiction. You wouldn't dare, my father growled. Try me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I have nothing left to lose. You made sure of that. The call devolved into chaos, my father shouting, Leo cursing, my mother weeping. I watched them, feeling a strange, sad detachment. This conversation is over, I said finally. Do not contact me again. I ended the call. The silence in my apartment a stark contrast to the storm I had just unleashed. My phone lit up instantly, but I ignored it. I opened a new document and typed out a detailed account of the call, just as my lawyer had advised. Then I blocked their numbers. It was a simple action, but it felt monumental. That night, sleep was fitful, but when I woke up, I felt a solid core of strength I'd never felt before. The confrontation had been an agonizing but necessary surgery, and for the first time, I felt like the healing could begin. Within days, the fallout radiated through our extended family. It became painfully clear that my parents had launched a swift and effective smear campaign. My Aunt Carol called to lecture me on my heartless behavior. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly weighing in on my character flaws. The narrative was set. I was the ungrateful, wealthy daughter who had abandoned her loving family in their time of need. After a week of exhausting, circular conversations where my side of the story was dismissed, I changed tactics. I composed a single, detailed email laying out the unvarnished facts, the lifelong favoritism, the self-funded education, and the exact conversation I had overheard. I sent it to only 3 people: my grandmother, Eleanor, who who had always shown me quiet kindness, my cousin Sophie, who had been a childhood friend, and my Uncle Robert, my mother's younger brother, who I'd once heard subtly question the disparity in how Leo and I were treated. "I'm not asking you to take sides," I wrote in closing. "I'm just asking you to consider that there's another side to this story. I have removed myself from a toxic situation, and I hope you can respect my decision." The responses were a balm to my wounded spirit. My grandmother called, her voice trembling. "I always saw it, Chloe," she confessed. "I tried to talk to your mother about it years ago, but she wouldn't listen. I should have done more." Sophie's reply was a simple text. "I believe you. Uncle Robert invited me to lunch the next time I was on the East Coast. Over pasta, he revealed he had also distanced himself from my parents. They have always had a blind spot the size of Texas when it comes to Leo," he said, shaking his head. "You did the right thing, kid. You have to protect yourself." These small pockets of validation were lifelines. At work, I channeled my turmoil into my projects, earning praise from my boss, who mistook my distraction for ambition. In my personal life, I leaned on my friends, my chosen family, allowing myself to be vulnerable for the first time. 3 months after the confrontation, I knew I needed a bigger change. My firm had an opening in their Seattle office. It was a lateral move, not a promotion, but the thought of putting 3,000 miles between me and my past was irresistible. My transfer was approved. I sold my condo, and the process of packing up my life felt like a metaphor for the emotional work I was doing, sorting through what was worth keeping and what needed to be left behind. Seattle was a rebirth. I found a bright apartment with a view of the Puget Sound, joined a hiking club, and slowly started to build a new life. I also found a support group for adult children from dysfunctional families. Sitting in that circle for the first time was terrifying, but as I listened to others share their stories of financial abuse, of emotional manipulation, I felt a profound sense of recognition. I wasn't alone. Week after week, I found my voice, and through the shared experiences of the group, I came to a crucial understanding. One night, a woman named Taylor said something that struck me to my core. The hardest part is accepting that they will never be the parents you needed them to be. That no matter how successful or perfect you are, they will never truly see you. Her words were both devastating and liberating. I had spent my entire life on a treadmill, running towards an approval that was never waiting for me. I could finally step off. About 6 months into my new life, I got an email from my cousin Mark. FYI, it read, "Leo filed for bankruptcy. Your parents had to cash out their retirement funds to try and help him." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, a grim vindication, a flicker of sadness for the parents they could have been, and an overwhelming wave of gratitude that I had escaped the sinking ship. A year after my move, I was promoted to team leader. My apartment felt like a home, filled with plants and art and laughter. I had deep, meaningful friendships. On quiet evenings, I'd sometimes think about my family in Ohio, not with anger or longing, but with the detached curiosity one has for characters in a book they finished long ago. They had written my first chapter, but they no longer controlled my narrative. I had built a life that was entirely my own, a life of peace and integrity. It had come at a great cost, but as I watched the sunset over the water from my window, I knew without a single doubt that it had been worth it. 3 years went by in a flash. My life in Seattle blossomed. I was promoted again, now managing a significant division at my firm. My apartment wasn't just a refuge, it was home. I even started dating someone seriously, a kind man I met through my hiking club. My newfound ability to set healthy boundaries, allowing me to build a relationship based on reciprocity, not just sacrifice. My volunteer work, teaching financial literacy workshops to at-risk young women, became a passion. "You explain this stuff like someone who had to learn it the hard way," a young woman told me after one session. "I did," I replied with a smile. My contact with my biological family was minimal. I exchanged holiday texts with my grandmother and cousin Sophie, and had coffee with Uncle Robert when he was in town for work. I heard through the grapevine that my parents were struggling and that Leo had moved to Florida for a fresh start. I felt no joy in their hardship, only a quiet finality. The boundaries I had built were holding strong. Then, on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line stopped me cold. Long overdue. It was from Leo. For a full 5 minutes, I just stared at it, debating whether to delete it or open it. Curiosity won. "Chloe," it began, "I know you have no reason to ever hear from me again. I wouldn't blame you if you deleted this, but I hope you'll give me a minute. I've been in therapy for the last year, dealing with my gambling addiction and the mess I made of my life. Part of recovery is making amends. You're at the very top of that list. What we tried to do to you was unforgivable. There is no excuse for the years of favoritism or for that final betrayal. I was spoiled, entitled, and blind to the reality you lived. Since the bankruptcy, I've had to support myself for the first time. I work 2 jobs, live in a tiny apartment, and I'm slowly rebuilding my life. In other words, I'm finally living the life you always had to. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I just needed you to know that I see it now, and I am truly, deeply sorry. Leo." I read the email 3 times, searching for the hidden manipulation, the subtle angle. Finding none, I closed my laptop and went about my day, the words echoing in my mind. That evening, I called my therapist. "What do you want to do?" she asked after I read her the email. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me knows that responding opens a door I slammed shut for a very good reason. But another part wonders if people can really change. For 2 weeks, I sat with his email. In the end, I wrote a short, carefully worded reply. "Leo, thank you for your email. I appreciate the apology and I'm glad you're getting help. I will need time to consider what, if any, relationship I might want with you in the future. Please respect that. Chloe." His response was immediate. "I completely understand. Take all the time you need." 3 months later, we had our first video call. It was awkward, but he looked different. The entitled smirk was gone, replaced by a weary humility. He talked about his recovery, his modest job, his struggles. We agreed to proceed with caution, maybe an email once a month. No promises. I didn't know where it would lead, or if his change was real. But I knew I was strong enough to walk away again if I had to. The real lesson of my journey wasn't about family betrayal. It was about discovering the power to build my own family, to surround myself with people who cherished me for who I was, not what I could provide. Sometimes, losing the family you were born into is the only way to find the peace you deserve. And sometimes, protecting your finances is the first and most crucial step toward protecting your heart. As I ended the call with Leo, I felt a quiet certainty. Whatever came next, I would be okay. I had saved myself when no one else would, and that was the only victory that ever truly mattered. Have you ever had to protect yourself from the very people who should have been your protectors? How did you find the courage to set boundaries and build a new life? Share your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to put yourself first. Thank you for listening, and remember The family we choose can often be more real than the family we're given. End of story.